On his 18th birthday, a boy aged out of the system with nothing but a change of clothes and a cryptic letter about a piece of land nobody wanted. What he and his sister discovered there wasn't just a home. It was a secret kept for a generation. If you've ever felt lost or like you had to build a future from nothing, hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. The day I turned 18, the world gave me two things: a black trash bag containing everything I owned, and a legal document that felt like a joke. It was March, the kind of March in upstate New York where the sky is the color of dishwater, and the slush on the ground has forgotten what it feels like to be snow. I stood on the cracked concrete steps of the Northwood group home, the place that had been my holding cell for the last 6 years, and felt the cold seep through the worn soles of my sneakers. The door clicked shut behind me. Not with a bang, but a quiet, final little sound. The sound of an account being closed. I was officially an adult. Officially homeless. My caseworker, a perpetually tired woman named Mrs. Gable, had handed me the bag and a manila envelope. "Happy birthday, Leo," she'd said, her voice flat, as if she were reading a grocery list. "Your final disbursement is in there, $250. And this," she tapped the envelope. "It's from the county probate office, something your grandfather left you." I hadn't seen my grandfather since I was 9. He died a year before my parents did, a detail that always felt like a cruel, backward punchline. I clutched the thin envelope, the paper already growing damp in the freezing mist. Inside the group home, through the wire mesh window of the common room, I could see my sister, Maya. She was 12. Her face was pressed against the glass, her expression a perfect, heartbreaking mirror of my own fear. We couldn't say goodbye. It was a rule. No prolonged emotional displays. It was disruptive to the routine. So we just looked at each other. Her small hand was flat on the pane, and I wanted to put my own against it. But I was already on the other side of the wall. I was out. She was still in. That single pane of glass felt like 100 miles of empty highway. The trash bag was light. A few pairs of jeans, some t-shirts, a worn copy of a book my mom used to read to me, and a framed photo of the 4 of us, Mom, Dad, Maya, and me, at a county fair, all squinting in the sun. It was the only thing I had that felt truly mine. $250. It was supposed to be my start, my launch into the world. It felt like enough money to starve slowly, not enough to live. I walked away from Northwood without looking back, because if I looked back, I knew I would see Maya's face, and I wouldn't be able to take another step. I'd just stand there until I froze to the sidewalk. The bus station was a 10-block walk. The wind cut through my thin jacket. Every gust felt personal. I sat on a hard plastic bench inside, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant and despair. I opened the manila envelope. Inside was a letter from a lawyer I'd never heard of, a Mr. Alistair Finch, from a town I couldn't pronounce, somewhere deep in the Catskills. The letter was dense with legal jargon, but I pieced it together. My grandfather, Thomas Vance, had left me something in his will. It wasn't money, it was a property. Specifically, Lot 7B, a 2.5-acre parcel of unincorporated land. The letter stated that to claim the deed, I had to appear in person at his office and pay the outstanding property taxes and transfer fee. The total came to $5. $5 for 2.5 acres of land. It had to be a mistake, or a cruel joke. Land wasn't $5. A greasy slice of pizza at the station kiosk was almost $5. I read the line again. Upon receipt of the $5 settlement for arrears and fees, The deed for parcel 7B will be transferred to your name. There was a grainy, photocopied satellite image of the plot attached. It was a square of smudgy gray surrounded by darker gray. A single structure was visible, a long, curved shape, like a metal bread loaf dropped in the middle of the woods. A Quonset hut. I'd seen pictures of them in history books. Rusted, semicircular buildings from an old war, repurposed as barns or workshops. This one looked abandoned, forgotten, a piece of junk on a piece of worthless land. Maybe that's why it was $5. It was a liability. Maybe it was contaminated. Maybe it was on the side of a cliff. My first instinct was to throw the letter away. It was a distraction. I needed a plan. I needed a job, a room, a way to start saving so I could fight for Maya. The state didn't care about keeping siblings together if one of them aged out. I was on my own, and she was on a clock. In 6 years, she'd be standing on those same steps with her own trash bag. The thought was a physical pain, a tightening in my chest that made it hard to breathe. But the letter wouldn't leave my mind. $5. It was less than 3 hours' work at a minimum wage job. It was a risk, but what was the alternative? Spending my $250 on a week in a grimy motel room before ending up in a shelter. The idea of owning something, anything, even a patch of dirt with a metal can on it, was a tiny seed of an idea that started to grow in the barren soil of my fear. It was a destination, a place to go that wasn't a shelter. I looked at the picture of my family. My grandfather was in the background, a tall, quiet man with kind eyes, holding a cone of cotton candy for Maya. He wasn't a man who played cruel jokes. He was a carpenter, a man who built things. He smelled of sawdust and pipe tobacco. He taught me how to tie a proper knot, how to read a compass. He was practical. There had to be a reason. My bus was being called over the crackling intercom. It was heading south, toward the city, toward the shelters and the anonymous, brutal grind I had been warned about. On a different platform, another bus was idling, its destination sign lit up with a series of small-town names, one of which I recognized from the lawyer's letterhead. It was a choice, a real one, the first real choice I'd gotten to make in years. Go toward the expected, miserable future, or take a $5 chance on a ghost. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. I walked over to the ticket counter, the trash bag slung over my shoulder. I bought a one-way ticket to a town I'd never seen, to claim a piece of land that was probably worth less than the paper the deed was printed on. It was the stupidest, most reckless thing I had ever done. It was the best decision of my life. The journey felt like a descent into another world. The bus rattled its way out of the city's gray orbit, past skeletal strip malls, and into the rolling, empty expanse of the mountains. For hours, I watched the landscape change. The trees grew thicker, the hills steeper. Patches of dirty snow clung to the shadows, stubborn remnants of a long winter. The other passengers were mostly older people, their faces etched with the quiet resignation of rural life. No one spoke to me. I was just another kid with a bag, another ghost on the bus. I felt invisible, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a shield. I called Maya from a payphone at a rest stop. We weren't supposed to have contact for the first 30 days, another rule. But I had saved the number for a payphone down the hall from her room, and I knew she'd be waiting. Her voice was small, a little shaky. "Leo, is that you?" "It's me, May. Are you okay?" "Where are you? They said you were gone." "I am. I'm on a bus. I'm going somewhere." I tried to make it sound like a plan, like an adventure. Where? I told her about Grandpa's letter, about the land. I tried to sell it to her, to myself. It's our own place, May, a real place. It has a building on it and everything. A building? Like a house? Sort of, I hedged. It's sturdy, made of metal. There was a pause. I could hear her thinking, trying to picture it. Does it have a roof? Yeah, I said, my voice cracking a little with a laugh I didn't feel. It's pretty much all roof. Is it far? Yeah, it's far. But I'm going to fix it up. I'm going to make it a home. And then I'm going to come for you. I promise. It was a wild, impossible promise, and we both knew it. I was 18 with $200 and a worthless deed. The legal battle to get custody of a sibling was a mountain I couldn't even see the base of. But I had to say it. She had to hear it. I know, she whispered. Be safe, Leo. You too, May. I love you. I love you too. The line went dead, and I stood there in the cold, holding the receiver, the dial tone buzzing in my ear like an angry insect. The weight of that promise settled on my shoulders. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about her. The lawyer's office was on the main street of a town that looked like it had been forgotten by the last 50 years. The buildings were brick and stone, their signs faded by the sun. Mr. Finch was a man who matched his surroundings. He was old, with a neatly trimmed white beard and glasses perched on the end of his nose. His office smelled of old paper and furniture polish. He looked at me over his spectacles, his gaze neutral, unreadable. Mr. Vance, he said, his voice a dry rustle. You came. I did, I said, my own voice sounding thin. I placed a crumpled $5 bill on his polished mahogany desk. He didn't look at it. He slid a thick stack of papers toward me. The deed to parcel 7B, as stipulated in your grandfather's will. Sign here and here. He pointed with a bony finger. I signed where he indicated, my hand shaking slightly. My signature looked like a child's scrawl. Now, he said, leaning back in his leather chair, which groaned in protest. Let's talk about the reality of your situation. Your grandfather bought that land 30 years ago. It was cheap then, and it's not worth much more now. It has no road access, no well, no septic, no power. It is, for all intents and purposes, a piece of wilderness with a derelict military surplus hut on it. Why did he leave it to me? Your grandfather was a sentimental man, Mr. Finch said. He was also a very private one. He never told me his specific intentions. He just made it very clear that on your 18th birthday, the property was to be offered to you, and only you, for the sum of the outstanding taxes. If you declined, it would be absorbed by the state. He paused, looking at me intently. There is, however, another option. I received an inquiry about the property last week. A developer, part of a larger LLC, is buying up land in that area. They are prepared to offer you $5,000 for it, as is. My breath caught. $5,000. It was a fortune. It was a real start. It was a security deposit on an apartment. It was a lawyer's retainer to start the fight for Maya. It was the smart choice, the logical choice, the sane choice. It would solve all my immediate problems. But then I thought of my grandfather, a man who built things, a man who didn't do things without a reason. And I thought of the promise I made to Maya. I'm going to make it a home. A motel room wasn't a home. They've been buying up a lot of the old parcels, Mr. Finch continued, his tone giving nothing away. They're planning a resort, I believe, a golf course. They've been very persistent. The way he said persistent made it sound like a threat. $5,000 was their opening offer. It was what they thought a desperate kid would jump at. It was an insult dressed up as an opportunity. "I'm not selling," I said. The words came out before I had even fully formed the thought. They felt solid, real. Mr. Finch raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something, surprise, respect, in his old eyes. "Are you sure, son? $5,000 could give you a considerable head start." "I'm sure," I said, my voice stronger this time. "It's mine. I want to see it." He nodded slowly, a small smile playing on his lips. "Very well. Your grandfather would have liked that." He slid a large, old-fashioned iron key across the desk. It was heavy, ornate, and covered in a fine layer of rust. "This is for the padlock on the hut. He left it with me all those years ago." He then gave me a hand-drawn map on a piece of yellowed paper. The directions were simple. Follow the county road for 3 miles. Turn onto a dirt track called Old Miller Road and walk until it disappears. The property was another half-mile hike through the woods from there. "Good luck, Mr. Vance," he said, standing to shake my hand. His grip was surprisingly firm. "I have a feeling you're going to need it." The walk was longer than I expected. The sun was getting low, casting long, distorted shadows through the trees. Old Miller Road was more of a suggestion than a road. 2 muddy ruts disappearing into a thicket of pine and bare-limbed maple. My trash bag felt heavier with every step. The air grew colder, the silence deeper. The only sound was the crunch of my sneakers on the frozen ground and the frantic beating of my own heart. I was terrified. I was completely, utterly alone. But I was also walking toward something that was mine. The thought was a small, warm coal in the center of my chest. I followed the map, counting my paces, until I came to a line of old, crumbling stone walls, the kind farmers used to build to mark their land. According to the map, this was it. My land. I pushed through a tangle of thorny bushes, and there it was, the Quonset hut. It was bigger than I'd imagined, and in worse shape. It squatted in a small clearing, a great gray corrugated beast. Rust bloomed in angry orange patches all over its curved surface, like a skin disease. The 2 massive doors on the front were dented and scarred. Weeds and small saplings grew right up to its edges, trying to reclaim it for the forest. It didn't look sturdy. It looked defeated. My heart sank. This wasn't a home. It was a tomb. I walked around it, the ground soft and spongy beneath my feet. A few small, grimy windows were set high up on the sides, too high to see through. At the back, a stovepipe poked crookedly toward the sky. It was a wreck, a piece of junk. The $5,000 offer echoed in my mind. I could still turn back. I could walk back to town, find a phone, and call the lawyer. I could take the money and run. No one would blame me. But I had the key, the heavy, rusted key. It felt like a responsibility in my pocket. I went to the front doors. A thick, rusted chain was wrapped around 2 handles, held together by a massive padlock that looked as old as the hut itself. It was the same color as the rust on the walls. I slid the key in. It grated, resisted. For a moment, I thought it was the wrong one, that this was all some final cosmic joke. I put my shoulder into it, turning with all my strength. There was a loud, protesting screech of metal on metal, and then a solid, satisfying clunk. The lock sprang open. The chain fell away with a heavy clang. It took all my weight to pull one of the huge doors open. It groaned on its hinges, the sound echoing in the silent woods. I peered inside. The interior was vast and dark, a cavern of shadows. A single beam of dusty afternoon light cut through the gloom from a crack in the roof, illuminating a universe of swirling dust motes. The air was thick and musty, the smell of damp earth, rust, and trapped time. It was empty, or almost empty. In the center of the huge, curved space, sitting directly in that single shaft of light, was a small, wooden crate. It was just sitting there, waiting. It looked deliberate, placed. My fear gave way to a powerful, prickling curiosity. I left my bag by the door and walked toward it, my footsteps echoing in the massive space. The floor was poured concrete, cracked and uneven. The crate was old, made of dark, weathered wood, with rope handles on the sides. There was no lid. I looked inside. It was filled with old glass jars, the kind people used for canning. They were packed in straw, each one sealed with a wax lid. At first, I thought it was food, preserves. My grandfather, a practical man, leaving me food. But when I lifted one of the jars, it was too heavy, and the contents weren't peaches or beans. The jar was filled with tightly rolled bundles of cash. They were old bills, held together with crumbling rubber bands. I stared at it, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. I picked up another jar, and another. They were all the same, each one packed with money. I sat down hard on the cold concrete floor, my legs suddenly weak. I pulled one of the bundles out. The rubber band snapped, and a cascade of $20 bills spilled into my lap. They were soft, worn, real. I counted them. $1,000. In one bundle. There were at least 20 bundles in that one jar, and there were at least a dozen jars in the crate. This wasn't a head start. This was a different life, a different future. This was Maya's future. I started to laugh, a strange, choked sound that echoed off the curved metal walls. Then the laughter turned into something else, a deep, gut-wrenching sob. I cried for everything. For the years in the system, for the cold loneliness of the last 24 hours, for the terror and the desperation. I cried for my parents, and I cried for the quiet, practical man who had built this strange, rusted ark for me, a secret lifeboat in the middle of the woods. He hadn't just left me a piece of land. He had left me a chance. But as I sat there, surrounded by a fortune I couldn't comprehend, I saw something else at the bottom of the crate, tucked beneath the last layer of straw. It was a thick, leather-bound journal, and on the cover, in faded gold leaf, was my grandfather's name, Thomas Vance. I opened it. The first page wasn't a journal entry. It was a letter. The handwriting was neat, precise, the script of a man who worked with his hands. It was addressed to me. Leo, it began. If you are reading this, it means you turned 18. It means you were strong enough to make it this far, and it means you didn't take the easy money. I knew you wouldn't. You have your mother's heart, but you have my stubbornness. That's a good combination. Reading his words felt like hearing his voice, a faint echo across the years. This place probably doesn't look like much. The money is for you and Maya. It's everything I saved. I sold the house after your grandmother passed and lived cheap. I wanted you both to have a foundation, something the world couldn't take away. But the money is the least important thing I'm leaving you. The most important thing is this land, this hut, This is your home if you choose to make it one. The letter went on. He explained that he had bought the land cheap because of its lack of access and utilities, but he saw something others didn't. He wrote about the developers, even back then, sniffing around, trying to consolidate the parcels for a big project. He knew they'd be back. They think this land is empty, he wrote. They are wrong. Don't let them bully you, son. They will try. They will offer you money that sounds like a kingdom. But what you have here is more valuable than their resort. You just have to find it. The last line was underlined twice. The foundation is the key. Everything starts with the foundation. I looked around at the cracked concrete floor. The foundation. What did he mean? The money was overwhelming, but the letter, the mystery, was what truly captured me. This wasn't just a handout. It was a task. A puzzle left for me by a man I barely knew, but who had clearly known me and loved me very well. I spent my first night in the Quonset hut. I didn't have a sleeping bag, just my thin jacket and the clothes I was wearing. I found a pile of old, musty canvases in a corner and made a makeshift bed. I didn't touch the money again. I put the jars back in the crate and slid it into a dark corner, covering it with a tarp. It felt dangerous, like a secret that could burn the whole place down. The cold was profound. It seeped up from the concrete and down from the metal ceiling. Every gust of wind outside sounded like a giant trying to peel the roof off. I lay there in the dark, listening to the sounds of the forest, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of some small creature in the leaves. I was terrified, but it was a different kind of fear than I had ever known. It wasn't the fear of a group home bully or a caseworker's arbitrary rules. It was an elemental fear, the fear of being a small, warm thing in a vast, cold wilderness. And in a strange way, it felt cleaner, more honest. In the morning, I woke up stiff and freezing, but alive. The sun was streaming through the crack in the roof, and the hut was filled with a pale, hopeful light. I had work to do. My first priority was survival. I needed food, water, and warmth. I took $100 from one of the jars. The act felt like a betrayal and a necessity all at once, and hiked back into town. The town looked different in the daylight. Less forgotten, more patient. I went to the hardware store, a place that smelled of metal and oiled wood. An old man with a friendly, weathered face watched me as I wandered the aisles, completely lost. "Help you find something, son?" he asked. I need a lot of things," I admitted. I told him a half-truth, that I was camping out for a while, fixing up an old place. I didn't mention the inheritance or the money. He nodded, not pressing for details. People in small towns, I was learning, had a way of respecting privacy. He helped me pick out the essentials: a good axe, a bow saw, a heavy-duty tarp to patch the roof, buckets for carrying water, a propane camp stove, and a warm sleeping bag. His name was George, and he gave me a discount, telling me to consider it a welcome-to-the-neighborhood gift. I bought groceries at the small market: canned soup, bread, peanut butter, coffee, simple things that felt like luxuries. The walk back to the hut, laden with supplies, was brutal, but every step felt purposeful. I was building something. I was starting. The next few weeks were a blur of hard physical labor. I patched the hole in the roof with the tarp, a precarious job that involved climbing the curved roof with a rope. I cleared the weeds and saplings from around the hut. I found a small, clear stream about a quarter-mile away, and I hauled water back in the buckets George had sold me. I learned how to chop wood, my hands quickly becoming calloused and blistered. I found an old wood-burning stove in the back of the hut, rusted but intact. I spent 2 days cleaning it, polishing it, and running a new pipe up through the old stovepipe hole. The first night, I lit a fire in it. The warmth that spread through the vast space felt like a miracle. It pushed back the damp, the cold, the darkness. It made the hut feel less like a metal can and more like a shelter. I talked to Maya every few days from the payphone in town. I told her about the work, about the stove, about the woods. I didn't tell her about the money. It was too big, too dangerous a secret to speak over a phone line. But she could hear the change in my voice. "You sound different, Leo," she said one night. "How?" "I don't know. Older. Less scared." "I am scared," I told her honestly. "But it's a good scared now." The letter from the developers arrived a month after I did. It was delivered to Mr. Finch's office, who called me into town. It was on thick, creamy paper, with an embossed logo of a stylized mountain peak. The company was called Summit Creek Estates. Their offer was now $25,000. "They're getting serious," Mr. Finch said, watching my face as I read it. "They mention in the letter that if you refuse, they are prepared to petition the county to seize the land under eminent domain for utility access, claiming your unimproved structure constitutes a blight." It was a threat, wrapped in legalese. They were trying to intimidate me. The old me, the kid on the steps of the group home, would have been terrified. He would have taken the money and run. But the kid who had spent a month hauling water and chopping wood, the kid who had a warm stove and a roof that didn't leak, mostly, was different. "What did my grandfather mean?" I asked, pushing their letter aside. "He wrote that the foundation was the key." Mr. Finch leaned forward, his expression serious. "I don't know for sure. Thomas was, as I said, a private man. But I know he was a master carpenter and stonemason before that. He worked on a lot of the old dam projects in this state. He knew geology. He knew how to read the land. If he said the foundation was important, he meant it literally." I went back to the hut with that thought buzzing in my head. The foundation, the poured concrete floor. It was cracked and uneven in places, but mostly it was just a huge gray slab. I spent the next day on my hands and knees, examining every inch of it. I swept it clean of dust and dirt, running my hands over the rough surface. In the far back corner, partially hidden by the wood stove I had installed, I found it. It wasn't a crack, it was a line. A perfectly straight, deliberate line cut into the concrete, forming a large square, about 4 feet by 4 feet. It was a seam, a trap door. My heart hammered against my ribs. I spent an hour trying to find a way to lift it. There were no handles, no rings. It was perfectly flush. I finally realized it was a counterweight system. I had to press down on one edge, hard. I used a long piece of timber as a lever. With a low groan of grinding stone, the massive concrete slab tilted upwards, revealing a dark, square hole in the foundation. A ladder made of iron rebar led down into the blackness. The air that rose up smelled of cold stone and deep earth. It was a cellar, a hidden room. I grabbed a flashlight and descended. The cellar was small and dry, the walls made of expertly fitted fieldstone, my grandfather's work. It was clear he had built this. And in the center of the cellar, on a stone pedestal, was a heavy metal lockbox. Next to it was another letter, sealed in a glass jar to protect it from moisture. I opened the jar and unfolded the paper. "Leo," the letter read, "if you found this, you were paying attention. Good man. I built this hut for a reason, not just to hide the money, not just to give you a roof. I built it on this exact spot, for what's under it. My eyes scanned the page, my breath held tight in my chest. When I was a young man, I worked on a geological survey team for the state. We mapped this whole region. Most of it is shale and granite, worthless. But there's a vein of something else that runs under this ridge, a deep aquifer, some of the purest spring water in the state. The survey was buried, classified by the state to prevent a water rush. I never forgot the location. This land sits directly on top of the main reservoir. The water rights for this parcel were never separated from the deed because no one ever knew the water was there. You don't just own 2.5 acres of land, son. You own the water underneath it. All of it. I sat down on the cold stone floor of the cellar, the letter shaking in my hand. Water. The developers, Summit Creek Estates, weren't building a resort with a golf course without a massive private water source. They couldn't. They weren't after my worthless piece of land. They were after what was underneath it, and they were trying to steal it from me for $25,000. The lockbox contained all the proof. My grandfather's copies of the original geological surveys, the water tables, and a carefully documented legal opinion he had commissioned years ago from a water rights specialist, confirming that the owner of parcel 7B controlled the aquifer. He had been planning this for 30 years. He had built a fortress to protect our future. The anger hit me first, a hot, white rage. These people, this faceless company, had looked at me and seen an easy mark, an orphan kid they could crush. They had underestimated me. They had underestimated my grandfather. I went back to Mr. Finch the next day and laid the contents of the lockbox on his desk. He read through the documents, his eyes widening. He took off his glasses and polished them slowly, a genuine broad smile spreading across his face. "Thomas, you magnificent bastard," he whispered to himself. Then he looked at me. "Leo, this changes everything. This isn't a defensive fight anymore. This is leverage. We don't have to just tell them no. We can set our own terms." The next few months were a crash course in a world I never knew existed. A world of lawyers, hydrology reports, and corporate negotiations. Mr. Finch was my guide, my general. He hired a top water rights lawyer from Albany with a portion of the money from the crate. I learned words like riparian rights and commercial extraction permits. The battle was quiet, fought with registered letters and legal filings, not fists. Summit Creek Estates tried to fight back. They tried to bury us in paperwork. They tried to challenge the validity of my grandfather's survey. But he had been too meticulous. His work was flawless. Their case was built on the assumption that no one knew what was down there. Once we proved we did, their whole strategy crumbled. During this time, I kept working on the hut. The legal battle felt abstract, unreal. The physical work was what kept me sane. I bought a small, used generator, which gave me power for lights and tools. I taught myself how to frame walls, how to run wiring, how to install insulation. I watched videos online. I read books from the town library. George from the hardware store became my unofficial mentor, giving me advice and letting me buy supplies on credit when my cash ran low. I was slowly, painstakingly, turning the metal shell into a real home. I built a small bedroom for myself. I built a larger one for Maya. I framed a space for a real kitchen and a bathroom. I spent hours sanding the old wooden planks I'd salvaged from a collapsed barn down the road, turning them into a warm, smooth floor. The Quonset was no longer a cold, empty cavern. It was taking shape. It was taking on our shape. The community, slowly but surely, started to notice. People in town would ask me how the project was coming. They had heard the rumors, of course. The city developers trying to push out the quiet kid who was fixing up the old Vance place. Small towns have their own immune system. They don't always take kindly to outsiders trying to throw their weight around. I started getting offers of help. A retired electrician showed me how to properly ground my wiring. A woman dropped off a box of old kitchen supplies, pots, pans, dishes. George let me use his workshop to build the kitchen cabinets. They weren't just being kind. They were choosing a side. They were choosing me. The turning point in the legal fight came when Summit Creek's lawyers realized we weren't going to back down, and we had the better legal claim. Their bluff had been called. They requested a meeting. I walked into Mr. Finch's office to find two men in sharp, expensive suits waiting for me. They looked uncomfortable, out of place in the dusty, quiet office. They tried to be charming. They talked about community, about progress, about a partnership. I just listened. Finally, their lawyer, a man with a plastic smile, slid a new offer across the table. It was for $250,000, $250,000, for my signature. A year ago, that number would have been unimaginable. It was a number that could make a person disappear and start a new life anywhere. And, the lawyer added, we will, of course, drop our petition with the county. Mr. Finch looked at me. He had told me this was my decision. He would support me either way. I thought about the money. I thought about how easy it would be. But then I thought about the feeling of splitting wood in the cold morning air. I thought about the pride I felt looking at the wall I had built, straight and true. I thought about my grandfather and the 30-year chess game he had been playing. And I thought about Maya and the promise I'd made her on that payphone. A home. No, I said. The two suits stared at me. The lawyer's smile faltered. I beg your pardon? The answer is no. I'm not selling the land. I'm not selling the water rights. I pushed a counter-proposal, one Mr. Finch and I had prepared, across the desk. But I will lease you utility access. You can run your pipes through a corner of my property. And in exchange for that, you will pay a yearly fee. And you will fund the drilling and installation of a commercial-grade well and pump system on my property, which I will own and control. And you will connect my home to the electrical grid at your expense. And finally, I took a deep breath, you will establish a community trust, administered by a local board, to ensure that residents of this town have priority access to water at reduced rates, forever. The men were speechless. They looked at the proposal, then at me, then at their lawyer. They saw a kid in a worn flannel shirt and work boots dictating terms to their multi-million-dollar corporation. They saw a ghost they couldn't bully. They left without giving an answer, but we all knew we had won. It took another month to hammer out the details, but they agreed. They agreed to everything. They had invested too much to walk away, and my proposal was, in the long run, cheaper than finding and securing a new water source. The day the contracts were signed, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt quiet. I walked back to the hut, my home. The power company had been there the day before. I flipped a switch by the door, and for the first time, the entire space was flooded with clean, bright, steady light. It wasn't a dusty sunbeam or the flickering glow of a lantern. It was real. The work wasn't over. It would never be over. But it was a home. That summer, I finally went to court for Maya. I didn't go alone. Mr. Finch came with me. George from the hardware store came. A half-dozen other people from the town came. I wasn't just some kid who had aged out of the system anymore. I was a landowner, a business owner, technically. I had a home, a stable income from the water lease, and a community standing behind me. The judge looked at my file, at the letters of support, at the pictures of the home I had built. He looked at Maya, who sat there, small and brave in her best dress. He granted my petition for guardianship. Walking out of that courthouse with Maya's hand in mine was the real victory. It was the only one that mattered. We drove home, back to the mountains, back to the Quonset hut. When she saw it, her eyes went wide. It wasn't a rusted, derelict can anymore. It had new windows, a proper door, a small porch I had just finished. Smoke was curling from the chimney. It looked warm and solid and real. "You did it, Leo," she whispered, her voice full of awe. "You built us a house." "It's not a house, May," I said, smiling. "It's a Quonset hut." "No," she said, grabbing my hand, her grip fierce and certain. "It's a home." We stand on that porch now, sometimes, and look out at the trees. The world is quiet here. The air is clean. We have everything we need. The money my grandfather left is still there, most of it, in a proper bank account now, a trust fund for Maya's future. But the real inheritance wasn't the money. It was the land, the water, the rusted metal shell. It was the chance to build something instead of just surviving. It was the gift of a difficult choice. My grandfather taught me that the most valuable things are often hidden, buried under layers of rust and neglect. He taught me that a home isn't something you find. It's something you build, with your own two hands, on a foundation of love and stubbornness. And he taught me that sometimes the greatest act of love is to leave someone a puzzle you know they are strong enough to solve. This whole journey, from that cold sidewalk outside the group home to this warm porch, has been about finding my own foundation. It's about understanding where I come from and choosing where I'm going. And what I want you to take from this, if you've made it this far with me, is that your foundation is yours to build. It doesn't matter what you start with, a trash bag, a $5 deed, a broken heart. You have the capacity to build a life of meaning and purpose. It will be hard. It will be lonely. You will want to quit. But every nail you hammer, every wall you raise, makes you stronger. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for your own piece of the world, I hope you'll subscribe and join our community here. And I want you to do me a favor. Go down to the comments and tell me about a time you chose the harder path. Tell me about something you built. I read every single one, and your stories, they matter. They are part of this home we're all building together. Thank you for listening.
We'll put that in there. Also, Nelly, you know what? Well, let's just pickles go well with everything. I agree. Am I the only one here from the Philippines? Sorry for bad English. I don't think so, Rich. I do think there are a couple other people from the Philippines that have joined the channel. Also, hey, Rosie. Good to see you. I did my french fries and ice cream and chocolate fudge. That's good too, Jelly. Like, well, I don't usually get Wendy's anymore, but if I do, I would dip my, fries in like the Frosty. Chocolate frosting fries. Absolutely. I feel, here's the thing, right? Someday, I will tell you guys my other food quirk, and it might send a couple people over the edge. Not the fellow Big Bags. But yeah, Manuela, it was actually really funny, cause Rich and Roland were like, they essentially said that they think they're the only one who watches my live every day, um, which is really funny. And then uh, Purple exploded.